Knock, knock, knock. As if knowing for sure that the knocking on the door was just a signal that someone was about to enter, the door to room number 2 swung open immediately. A slender nurse with a beautiful face approached my bed. Glancing at me before focusing on my medical file, she said, "Your name is Dewey, right? You have a dental infection that's caused a fever. You waited too long to get checked, and now it's reached the pulp. You'll need to stay in the hospital for a week. You'll get 2 injections every day, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon, an IV drip, and take medicine after dinner each day." After finishing, she pinned my medical record to the headboard. Groaning and clutching my mouth, I slowly sat up to see what the paper looked like. There was a column for the date, a column for tasks, and for each day, there were checkboxes for the injections or IVs. Everything was organized logically and calmly. Well, it's over now. I can't escape the injections this time. Sighing in frustration, I suddenly noticed a woman sitting in the bed next to mine, staring at me intently. When she caught my gaze, she spoke up. "Did you just get to the hospital this morning? I've been here for 2 weeks. My son had a motorcycle accident, lost a few teeth, and had over 100 stitches on his face. He's in the oral and maxillofacial department. Luckily, it's not crowded, so he gets a decent bed. If he were in another department with more patients, his face would never heal properly. Seeing you sitting up like this, you must have a milder case, right? You probably won't be in the hospital for long, will you?" I glanced at the young man behind her, who was lying still, waiting for his IV to finish. His face was covered in bandages, with only hints of the stitches visible on the bruised skin beneath. I shuddered. Getting scraped and bruised from a collision on the road was painful enough, but coming to the hospital to get stitched up like this, he'd probably avoid the road for the rest of his life. All morning until noon, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, afraid to move because I didn't want to touch the swollen area on my cheek that was nearly the size of a guava. I felt anxious waiting for my mother to bring in a book to read, but it took too long. By noon, another nurse brought in a bowl of porridge, instructing me to eat it quickly so I could get my medicine. This nurse was completely different from the one in the morning. She was plump and grumpy, leaving me utterly disappointed. I thought that if all the doctors and nurses in this hospital were beautiful, I would obediently stay here for treatment. But who knew? Bringing my feelings into lunch, I reluctantly slurped a few spoonfuls of porridge and left half of it. When the nurse returned and saw me refusing to eat, she jabbed me with a painfully heavy injection. I cried out, causing the woman I had spoken with earlier, who was now dozing in a nearby chair, to wake up and look over. Seeing me with tears and snot running down my face, she seemed to understand. After the nurse closed the door, she sat at the head of my bed and spoke softly. "Did the nurse give you a really painful injection?" This hospital is strange. Both the nurses and the doctors seem cold and harsh. My son was the same way. When he first came in for stitches, he cried like it was raining. And the 2 nurses next to him didn't even wipe his tears, letting them drip into the wound. It was already painful. And then it got even worse, leaving both of us awake all night from the pain. I found out later that someone had died in the hospital, which made everyone here so grim and the atmosphere so heavy and gloomy. I shuddered. At just over 20 years old, it was my first time being hospitalized, and I had chosen a hospital that suddenly had such grim news. Lost in my thoughts, the woman continued. I heard that someone took their own life at night, and when the doctors and nurses arrived in the morning, they screamed, causing all the patients in the rooms to jump out of bed and run into the hallway, where they were met with a horrifying sight. They rushed to help her down, but sadly, she was already lifeless. This hospital only has the oral and maxillofacial department, so there shouldn't be any patients who could die like that, which is why everyone felt confused and frightened. The hospital burned incense all day, hoping for her soul to find peace. So when did this happen? I heard it was just over a month ago, and today marks the 49th day. That's probably why the doctors and nurses all look like they've lost their spirits today. As I listened to the story, I felt goosebumps all over. Normally healthy, I thought that the outside world was complicated and unpredictable, but who knew that even in a hospital, a place for people to rest and recover, there could be so many terrifying things. I asked the woman if she knew why the girl took her own life, and she said she didn't know, only that she had heard the family of a patient in the next bed talk about it, but that patient had been discharged the day before. Being a son with a bit of a fragile disposition, I asked the woman for permission to rest, but my mind was far from calm enough to sleep. I lay there all afternoon, my mind spinning with the story she had told. With a toothache and now a lack of sleep, my head ached even more. In the afternoon, my mother came in with a bowl of bone broth and a stack of comic books and newspapers she had just bought. I thanked her profusely. Bone broth was my favorite dish, but with my tooth hurting, I could hardly enjoy it. My mother sat for a while, but eventually had to go back to cook for the family. She reminded me to stay still in the hospital for my treatment, as she had already taken a break from work. I intended to tell her about what I had heard in the morning, but seeing her bustling around, I didn't want her to worry. Instead, I thought that diving into the comics and newspapers she brought might help ease my boredom and fear. The sports newspaper my mother brought reminded me that tonight there would be a series of group stage matches in the Champions League, which filled me with secret joy. In the hospital, there were few conversations, and without the internet, the only source of entertainment was the TV. However, in the mornings and afternoons, the other patients kept insisting on watching Korean dramas and game shows, which frustrated me. So, I had concentrated entirely on my books, but tonight, when everyone had gone to sleep, I would take over the TV and satisfy my craving for information. Feeling excited, I happily ate my bowl of porridge for dinner while bracing myself for the last injection of the day. My eyes quietly observed the new nurse who had come in. Although she wasn't overweight, her face was cold and pale, looking weaker than the patient's. This hospital truly felt haunted. I sighed in frustration, waiting for night to fall as the entire city lit up. Looking through the window, outside the hospital gate, the headlights of cars and motorbikes created swift streaks of light, giving off a sense of bustling noise. The family members of patients had been sent home, leaving only those in similar hospital attire around me. Some lay still with wide eyes fixed on the ceiling, while others quietly ate porridge to gather strength for their medication. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a figure in white glided quickly past the window. I turned abruptly, one hand clutching my swollen cheek and the other gripping the window frame, glancing quickly outside. A chill ran down my spine, even though all the windows in the room were tightly closed. The figure in white was moving so fast, almost as if it were flying. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if the pain was making me hallucinate. Instantly, the figure disappeared into the staff's dormitory nearby. Could it be that this bizarre hospital actually had a ghost? Thud. The second time, my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The loud noise came from right behind me, making me think my time had come. Turning around, I saw a woman in the opposite bed, heavily pregnant, with her eye and right cheek covered in white bandages. Her lower lip was swollen into a monstrous lump as she looked at me with sympathy, struggling to explain. I'm so sorry. I accidentally hit the door. So hard, I didn't expect it to. Hurt this much. I made a sympathetic face, wanting to say it was okay, but my heart was still pounding so loudly that I couldn't manage to say a word. So what exactly was that figure in white? Could it be the ghost of the nurse who had taken her own life here? According to my plan, I was going to monopolize the TV tonight, but suddenly, fear crashed over me, making my eyelids heavy. I intended to cover myself with a blanket and finish reading the newspaper, but before I knew it, sleep had found me. In my dream, I saw the beautiful nurse from the morning come to check on my health, when suddenly, the figure in white appeared, making me scream in horror. Turning around, I found that the nurse had transformed into an old, pockmarked witch, jabbing needles into my arm. I jolted awake in panic, but I couldn't lift my eyelids. Even my limbs felt completely paralyzed. It seemed like someone was holding my arms and legs down, unable to move even a centimeter. My whole body felt heavy. I tried to twist to my left, but unfortunately, it was right against my swollen cheek, sending a jolt of pain through me like an electric shock, and I was drenched in sweat. Then, two hands, strong and furious, gripped my neck, squeezing tightly. I panicked, struggling to break free, my mouth trying to scream for help, but that damned swollen mouth made it impossible for any sound to escape. The harder I fought, the tighter that hand squeezed. This was it. I was definitely going to die. Thud. The sound of the window slamming against the frame was deafening. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Looking at my limbs, I found everything normal. I touched my neck and realized I was still, breathing. Relief washed over me, but I was still terrified by what had just happened. That wasn't just a dream. How could I be aware of everything so clearly in a dream? Could it be that someone had actually touched me? That didn't make sense. My arms, legs, and throat felt completely normal. I glanced around the room. Everyone was fast asleep. The entire space was enveloped in a thick, eerie darkness, silent and suffocating. Only the weak glow of the streetlight outside pierced through, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. I fumbled for my watch. It was 2 a.m. I tried to lie back down, closing my eyes as I attempted to make sense of everything that had just happened. Clearly, that wasn't just a dream. The feeling of a hand squeezing my throat, the agonizing pain when I touched my swollen cheek, everything felt so real, so terrifying. How could a dream conjure such intense emotions? But was it really possible that someone in this room had touched me, intent on killing me? Did someone want me dead? Thinking about this sent chills down my spine. I cracked my eyes open to glance around. The room remained eerily silent, with soft snores echoing from the others. They were all fast asleep. Who would have the malicious intent to kill someone as ordinary as me, and who could be quick enough to dash back to their bed the moment I opened my eyes? Suddenly, a theory flickered in my mind, making my heart race wildly. Or could someone be hiding under my bed? If that were the case, should I check? The thought made my skin crawl and my limbs felt ice cold. But if I didn't check and accidentally fell asleep again, wouldn't that give someone the chance to kill me? I couldn't let that happen. I was still too young, not even graduated from college yet. With that in mind, I made the most reckless decision of my life. I would actually go look to see what was under my bed. I groped for my phone on the bedside table. A million horrifying thoughts racing through my mind. If someone really were hiding there, what would I do? Scream? Grab something to hit them with? Or maybe I would just freeze in shock upon finding someone. My heart felt like it was about to burst. The more I thought about it, the less I could predict what would happen in the next 30 seconds. But I was resolute. I would rather die knowing why than descend into the underworld clueless about what had happened. With my phone in one hand and gripping the bed frame with the other, I slowly turned and bent down. Gathering all my courage, I pressed the button on my phone, and the screen lit up. This time, my heart truly shattered. The light from the phone's screen revealed that there was no one hiding under my bed, but something else was there. A white lab coat lay crumpled right at the foot of my bed. Although I felt lucky that it wasn't a person lurking there, the sight was still enough to send my heart racing in terror. I shone my phone down to the other patients' beds, but there was nothing. No one at all. The room remained eerily silent, filled only with the soft sounds of snoring, like a strange symphony. Everyone was deep in sleep, completely unaware that the new patient was on the verge of a panic-induced heart attack. I didn't dare touch or look at the coat any longer. Instead, I quickly turned back, lying flat on my bed again, this time with my eyes wide open, not willing to shut them. What was happening? Why was everything unfolding like this in just one evening? First, there was the shadow in white that resembled a ghost hovering outside the window. Then, the sensation of someone choking me while I was paralyzed, with the noise of the window snapping me back to reality. And now, there was a white lab coat tossed right beneath my bed? Could it be that all of this was somehow connected to the nurse who had committed suicide? Was she wandering the hospital grounds? Did she choke me? Was that her coat? When the sun just began to rise, the sunlight filtered through the gaps in the windows, waking up the entire hospital room. I woke up, surprised that I managed to doze off for a bit last night. Looking around in a hurry, I saw the woman who spoke to me yesterday sitting beside the bed, wiping the face of her son. When she noticed me looking at her, she smiled and said, "You're up now, huh? Your mouth is less swollen, but why does your face look so pale? The hospital air is uncomfortable, isn't it?" My son has been here for 2 weeks, and he lost several pounds. It breaks my heart. Feeling grateful for the woman's concern, I longed to tell her about the terrifying events of the previous night. It seemed like she sensed my troubled thoughts as she turned serious and asked, "What's wrong, dear?" "Didn't you sleep well last night?" "Auntie, there's something I want to tell you." What's wrong? Just tell me." "I think I encountered a ghost last night. It felt like someone was choking me, wanting me dead." "Huh, what did you say? Is this your first time in the hospital, and you're just too scared to think straight?" She was surprised and then suddenly burst out laughing. "Maybe you had sleep paralysis. My son used to be a little troublemaker and experienced the same thing. He'd imagine he was being choked and couldn't fight back. This happens to many people. It's just that you think too much during the day." Hearing her words, I was taken aback. Could it really be that I experienced sleep paralysis? It was my first time in the hospital. I had just heard the story about the nurse who committed suicide, and I had seen a ghostly figure darting outside the window. Was I losing my mind? But what about the white blouse? I glanced down at the bed. It had vanished. "I also saw a white blouse under my bed, Auntie, but now it's gone." "Oh, it's probably just one of the nurses' uniforms they left behind. Yesterday afternoon, while you were snoring, a lot of doctors and nurses came in to check on everyone's conditions. When they saw you finally sleeping, they decided to leave you alone, since you had just fallen asleep. With so many people, it's understandable that someone might forget their blouse." As I listened to her, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. So that was it. If I considered sleep paralysis a type of folk illness, then the missing white blouse could be easily explained. It didn't mean there was a ghost haunting this place. Perhaps I had imposed my fears about the suicide incident onto every strange occurrence I had experienced. I was just letting my imagination run wild. But what about the white figure? Surely that was something the woman couldn't explain. She hadn't been around then. My mom called to say that she couldn't visit me today. She had been busy all day, working hard, taking care of meals for the family, and in the evening she had to take my little sister to enroll in extra classes. She reminded me to rest in there, listen to the doctors and nurses, and eat well so I could recover quickly. Wow, she spoke as if I were still a child. I told her not to inform my friends that I was hospitalized. I wasn't particularly close with my classmates. The school I was currently attending was a private one, filled with wealthy kids, some of whom were snobbish and unpleasant, making it hard for me to fit in. My old friends had scattered to different places. Some had started working, while others had gone south for their studies. Overall, everyone was struggling to make a living. My neighborhood was poor, and my family had worked hard to provide me with a decent education without forcing me to earn money, and now I was sick, racking up hospital bills. I felt more sympathy and concern for my parents than ever. Listening to my mom's advice, I obediently ate all my meals, got my shots, and lay back while waiting for an IV drip to finish. All day, I could only lie in bed in various positions, reading through the books and magazines my mom had brought. I still kept an eye on the nurses coming in and out of the room, but I hadn't seen the beautiful nurse who first came to check on me at all. I was so disappointed. With someone like that, attending to patients in the hospital, wouldn't it lift everyone's spirits and make them more compliant with the staff? And then night came again, and tonight there was still football. I remembered that I had missed it last night, and today I was determined to make up for it. But at 1 a.m., when the other patients were peacefully tucked in, sleeping soundly, I quietly tiptoed out to press the TV's power button, only to find that the hospital had unplugged it or cut the power to the TV. Not wanting to miss the matches tonight, I resolved to leave my room and find somewhere to watch. Doctors are people too. Surely someone must share a passion for the beautiful game. I gently opened the door to my room, and my heart began to race as I stepped into the long, dimly lit corridor, illuminated only by a few flickering lights. What kind of hospital tries to save electricity to this extent? Any patient needing to use the bathroom in the middle of the night would surely hold it until morning, I thought to myself. I wasn't wearing slippers, walking barefoot to avoid making noise. Just as I took a few steps, the familiar sight appeared before me. A white figure darted swiftly down the end of the hallway, flickering in the dim light. It seemed that the ghost could see me too? The apparition paused, looking at me for a second or two. In that moment, I was certain my heart had stopped beating, and I couldn't even perceive my own breath. My bare feet felt icy against the corridor floor as I stood frozen, trying to fathom how I would explain this encounter in tonight's story. Immediately after that, the ghost glided away, leaving me standing there, stunned. It took me a moment to regain my composure before I hurried back to my room. As soon as I touched the doorknob, the door swung open, causing me to stumble forward and slam my cheek against the floor painfully. As I got up, I saw a tall, imposing figure with a face covered in scars, disfigured beyond recognition. His eyes were so swollen that they looked like mere slits, and his hair and beard were scraggly. He looked more terrifying than death itself, and I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. Seeing my horrified expression, the figure spoke angrily. "Watch where you're going. You can't even go to the bathroom without causing a scene." With that, he struggled to walk away, leaving me standing there in shock, trying to figure out what was happening. When I returned to my bed, I noticed the bed next to mine was empty, and realized that the person I had just collided with was the son of the woman who often spoke to me. Usually he lay still, and I had never dared to look closely at his face, so seeing his scarred visage in the dark was utterly horrifying. I lay back in bed, pretending to sleep. A little while later, I heard the door open and footsteps, guessing that he had come back. I thought about asking him if he had seen any white figures out there, but remembering his demonic appearance and his bitter tone from earlier, I shrank back, deciding that staying silent was probably the safest choice. So there I was, without any snacks or nighttime entertainment, having encountered a ghost for the second time. If I experienced sleep paralysis once more tonight, I would undoubtedly call my mother and ask to be discharged immediately, even if it meant making a phone call in the middle of the night. The next morning, I learned that I had slept so deeply that the nurse had to shake me awake multiple times to eat my porridge. In the adjacent bed, the swollen lips of the pregnant woman showed no signs of change, but it seemed she was perfectly fine, slurping her porridge without any pain. To my right, the older woman was feeding her son, holding a spoon in one hand and a tissue in the other, wiping around his mouth after every spoonful, looking quite diligent. As for me, seeing the same bowl of porridge for the past 2 days made me feel sick. I thought it would be better to just skip it. However, imagining the painful injections from the nurses made me realize that if I didn't eat, I might faint right there in bed. Thinking this, I opened my bag and searched for my wallet, deciding to buy some snacks or a box of milk to have the strength to fight off this illness. As I walked down the corridor, I lowered my head so the nurses at the reception desk wouldn't see me. Patients who left the treatment area were always questioned. However, these nurses were too engrossed in their chatter to pay attention to anyone. Just as I was about to sneak away, one of them spoke up, freezing me in place. "You don't know this since you're new, but our hospital just had a nurse hang herself. Apparently, it was really tragic, which is why the place feels so gloomy now. Back in the day, everyone was much friendlier." "Oh, really? But why did that nurse die? Are you sure it was suicide? What if someone harmed her?" "Shh, keep your voice down. That's what the doctors said, but who knows what people will gossip about. Actually, things have been strange in this hospital for a while. There was a safe that got broken into. They say they stole nearly hundreds of millions from the hospital. You're still young, so it's not a big deal for you. But for me, I'm worried the hospital might decide to cut staff." Ring. "Hey, it's time for your injection. You should go, otherwise the doctors will start yelling." Hearing this, I rushed out the door. I didn't expect this small hospital to have so much drama. The more I thought about it, the more my head ached. If I told these nurses that I had seen a ghost in the hospital, they would probably set up an altar to ward off evil spirits. By the afternoon, the nurses came in one by one to give injections to each patient. This time, it was the hefty nurse again, administering my shot, her sharp eyes glancing at the untouched bowl of porridge. She proceeded to jab me with another painful needle, and I couldn't hold back my scream, slamming my other hand on the bed. Unfortunately, I accidentally knocked over the half-finished bottle of milk, splattering it all over the bedsheet. The nurse grimaced and complained, making me clean up the mess myself while she went to fetch a new sheet. As I haphazardly pulled off the bedsheet and the mat underneath, I accidentally uncovered a small piece of cardboard that fluttered out. A long string of numbers that looked like some kind of code. While I stood there in a daze, the nurse's voice snapped me back to reality. "What are you standing there for? Why haven't you folded that up yet?" I saw this piece of paper. Immediately, everyone in the room turned to look at me with curiosity. Even the pregnant woman, who had been babbling on the phone, suddenly went quiet, listening intently to what I had in my hands. The nurse quickly snatched the paper from me, her mouth still moving as she said, "This is nonsense. Don't pay attention to it. New sheets are here. Fold them up." When the nurse closed the door and left, I was still puzzled about what had just happened. People around me were either staring at me or getting back to their own business. It was just a piece of paper filled with numbers. What was so interesting that everyone was acting this way? Even the nurse, who called it trivial, had snatched it right from my hand. The pregnant woman, after hanging up her phone, quickly asked me, what's that paper about?" "I don't know. It's just full of numbers." As soon as I answered, her face fell, and she didn't say anything more. I obediently adjusted my bed, my mind wandering. I had been here for 3 days. The pain in my mouth had lessened. I figured I would ask my mom if I could stay for another day or two before heading home. I'd rather deal with any nighttime disturbances in the comfort of my own house than lie motionless in this eerie atmosphere. That night, after C1 and 2 consecutive nights of terror, I decided not to stir anymore. I resolved to go to sleep early, hoping that slumber might shorten the nightmarish hours in the hospital. Many dreams visited me. I dreamed of being discharged, with my mother coming to pick me up. But the medical bills were too high, and the plump nurse made me stay behind to change the bed linens daily, only letting me go once I paid off what I owed. Then there were the windows, which kept slamming shut, causing the nurse to startle and jab the needle into my face, making me scream in pain and faint on the spot. In my dreams, the physical pain felt all too real, causing me to curl up and moan in agony. Then, it seemed, the sleep paralysis returned. I felt someone holding my legs and arms. The hands were strong and firm, and no matter how hard I tried to squirm, I couldn't move an inch. I told myself it was just sleep paralysis, just a dream, just a nightmare. All I needed to do was open my eyes. That would make it stop. But no, I still couldn't open my eyelids. I used every ounce of strength to move, sweat pouring down my face, yet I couldn't break free. And then I realized this wasn't a dream. There was, in fact, another hand slowly tightening around my neck. I struggled with all my might, but the more I fought, the tighter my limbs felt as they were gripped, and the hand around my throat showed no signs of letting go. In the deathly quiet of the night, only my weak attempts to resist broke the silence, when suddenly a voice, cold as ice, pierced through the air. "Tell me, what was written on the paper this afternoon?" The grip around my throat seemed to loosen slightly. I tried to sit up and open my eyes, but that hand tightened its hold on my neck, pulling me forcefully back down onto the bed. "Are you going to talk?" The icy voice spoke again. Indeed, earlier that afternoon I had seen and remembered a few of the numbers, but I lacked the patience to recall all of them. And now, as pain surrounded my entire body and death seemed to be near, it only dulled my senses further, leaving my mind blank and rendering me unable to utter a single word. Even with my eyes closed, the thick darkness allowed me to catch a glimpse of something bright being swung up, accompanied by a familiar voice. However, unlike before, this voice was no longer warm and caring. It was cold and indifferent. "He won't talk." "Do it." It was the voice of someone I recognized. As soon as I realized it was the voice of someone who had been caring for me every day, a loud bang echoed, followed by another thud that struck the bed directly. This time, there would be no window to save me. I shut my eyes, ready to welcome death. I hadn't even graduated from university. I hadn't done anything to make my parents proud. I hadn't even finished the bottle of milk I bought in the morning. Yet a few seconds later, I still didn't feel any pain. Wasn't that sound meant to strike me? No, it wasn't. I began to feel my limbs move again. Where were the two people who had been gripping my limbs and neck? Did they think they had succeeded and just left? Suddenly, a blinding light enveloped the entire space, making my eyelids burn as I slowly began to open them. When I regained my composure, I saw the nurse and her swollen-faced son slumped at the foot of my bed. What had just happened? I looked around, startled to find the pregnant woman staring at me intently, her eyes wide open, holding a cell phone to her ear. She spoke tersely to the person on the other end. "This situation is resolved. You can come to clean up the scene." Moments later, a crowd of police officers in uniforms swarmed into my hospital room. The other patients, hearing the commotion, slowly began to wake up, their faces pale as they whispered to each other, trying to figure out what had just occurred. I burst out laughing, a smile that had been hard-earned over the past few days. Even I, the one who had almost died and suffered through all this time, couldn't comprehend what was happening before me. The pregnant woman had been conversing with several police officers, instructing them to take the two unconscious individuals under my bed for questioning. Then she approached my bed and smiled. In the most surprising and astonishing manner, she removed all the bandages from her face and peeled away the large swollen piece carefully tucked under her lip, revealing a stunningly beautiful face. It was the nurse I had first seen when I arrived here. Noticing my jaw drop in shock, she gently explained, "I'm an officer from the district police, embedded in the hospital to uncover the culprit behind the robbery and murder case that occurred here." I went from one shock to another, as if it were all just a nightmare. I closed my eyes, then opened them again, checking to see if I was truly awake, if I was still alive. She continued speaking. "Are you tired?" "That makes sense. After inhaling the anesthetic, who could stay awake? For 2 nights, you were choked, and the whole room was sprayed with the gas. On the first night, I didn't anticipate this trick either, and slept like a log until suddenly I heard the window slam. I woke up, still unable to open my eyes, but hearing your labored breathing made me realize something was wrong. The next day, after you recounted your encounter with that woman, I suspected someone was intentionally trying to harm you. I was convinced that you were the target of those 2 killers. The police officer recounted how she had previously posed as the night nurse to monitor the actions of the 2 suspects, reasoning that during the day, with so many people around, they wouldn't dare do anything. But at night, seeing a nurse awake all night, the killers likely guessed she was not an ordinary person and refrained from acting. Realizing this approach wasn't effective, on the day I was admitted, she assumed the role of a pregnant woman to justify her presence in the hospital. Indeed, on the first night, there were strange occurrences. The feeling of being crushed and the sight of a white coat, which led her to form a hypothesis and ultimately reach her conclusion. You must be wondering how that mother could be at the hospital at night when she was supposed to have left by the afternoon. On the night you were admitted, she devised a plan to wear a white coat and pretend to be a patient, likely intending to team up with her son to make you unconscious and then search your bed, expecting it to be empty. Unfortunately, that night there were no nurses left, and you were the one who had been admitted, making you the target instead of her. Rather than harming her, they sought to kill you to rummage through your bed. If that night, she gestured across her neck, indicating the act of being silenced, they might have found the paper and quickly fled. I saw a white shadow that night, and again the following night, didn't I? Yes, it was her. On the first night, she must have blended in with the night staff, sneaking into the hospital. On the second night, since there was no anesthetic sprayed in the room, I suspect she wore a nurse's uniform to search for anesthetic in the hospital. Unexpectedly, she saw you running outside, signaling her son in the room to search. But then, once again, there was a twist of fate. I was wide awake, silently watching what he would do, planning to catch him in the act. He cautiously checked if you had returned before approaching your bed. At that moment, you had already come back, so he had to pretend he was just going to the restroom. I don't understand why he didn't just kill me then. Didn't they finish searching that night? Haha, you're still so naive. That night, the two of them didn't spray anesthetic in the entire room. If they had stabbed you and you screamed, all the other patients would have woken up immediately. How would he have had time to search? Then she continued, explaining that for the past 3 days, the mother had been pretending to leave in the afternoon when the doctors sent the family members home for the patient's rest. Then at night, she would blend in with the doctors and nurses on duty. Once everyone in the patient room turned off the lights, she would sneak into the room with her son to harm me. One would hold my arms and legs, while the other restrained me. The white coat I had seen under the bed was the one she used to sneak into the hospital. On the first night, they thought they had succeeded in harming me, but unexpectedly, the loud sound of the window banging saved me. Taking advantage of the night and the anesthetic, as soon as I managed to open my eyes, they quickly crawled under the bed and returned to their own beds. The mother also used an empty bed in the room that no one had occupied, and by dawn, she hurriedly put on her white coat, moving around the hospital openly, sneaking out and then back in as if she were a family member of a patient. As the nurse, who was also an undercover police officer posing as a pregnant woman, recounted the events, I stood in shock, unraveling the entire mysterious situation I had endured over the past few days. But behind all this, what did they want to search for in my bed? What exactly was that piece of paper that nearly cost me my life? That paper contains the bank vault code. It's linked to the money that the hospital lost a few months ago. The culprits are the son and the deceased nurse. This nurse was previously in charge of the hospital's finances, and due to greed, she involved her boyfriend in a plan to steal from the hospital. To create a facade, he pretended to be involved in a traffic accident to be treated here. One night, they successfully executed their plan to steal the money. However, since he was still a patient and couldn't leave the hospital, he had to give all the money to his girlfriend to keep. Little did he know that she would betray him, intending to flee with the money on her own. On the day she completed her resignation process, she encountered her boyfriend at the hospital, and a fight broke out between them. In a tragic turn of events, he killed the nurse right there in the hospital and staged it as a suicide. Given that the hospital had just lost money, and now there was a death, it would likely face closure, so even though everyone knew it wasn't a suicide, they had to present it to the media that way. I don't understand. Why did the nurse hide the paper with the vault code under my bed? I'm not entirely sure. It could be because the room she lived in was shared with her boyfriend, and she was afraid of being discovered if she took it with her. Or maybe she thought that if she hid it at home, his mother would come and search the house. Sometimes, the most dangerous places are the safest ones. There's a very important detail. The last patient she cared for was in the bed next to mine, which is why he focused all his suspicions on that bed and sought every means to search it thoroughly. The hospital was aware of this, so as soon as they involved the police in the case, they disguised an officer as a nurse to monitor all the patient rooms, with a particular emphasis on this one. Is that why you quickly identified him as a suspect? Exactly. After hearing some nurses discussing that a patient had been treated twice in a short period due to accidents and insisted on staying in this room, I became suspicious. I reviewed his records and discovered his connection to the nurse, which made my suspicions even stronger. When did the nurse become a suspect for embezzling funds? It was when she submitted her resignation. Typically, nurses and doctors who have worked in a hospital for a long time are very reluctant to change jobs. They fear being laid off during cutbacks. Yet when she submitted her resignation, She claimed it was voluntary, which made everyone suspicious. The resignation letter was very well typed, and the wording was polished, as if it had been prepared long in advance. That's when the hospital began to suspect her. By the way, aren't you tired? Is your neck still hurting? I'm sorry for being a bit slow earlier. You almost got stabbed. At that moment, I was fumbling to find a weapon under my belly, but I was so full from yesterday's meal that I couldn't get it out in time, so I had to take them down with my bare hands. Haha, sorry about that. Hearing the beautiful police officer, nurse laugh made my face twist in disbelief. I nearly lost my life, all because she ate too much. But thankfully, I was still in one piece, sitting here listening to her story instead of down in the underworld meeting the murdered nurse to learn the ins and outs of this tale. The sun was glowing. Throughout the hospital this morning, it seemed to have shed the gloom and troubles of the terrifying events of the past, stretching comfortably and returning to a light and cheerful atmosphere. Last night, after chatting with the police officer, who was also the nurse, she urged me to get some sleep. She would request the hospital to discharge me early since the past few days had frightened me a lot. Hearing her say that, I felt relieved and closed my eyes. Outside the window, everything seemed washed clean, fresh, and pleasant. I reached for my phone and saw a message from my mother at 6 a.m. "What do you want to eat for breakfast, Dewey?" I smiled and replied, "Anything is fine, Mom, as long as it's not." Before I could finish my text, the door opened, and my mother's cheerful voice rang out. "Dewey, are you awake? Get ready to go home. Just one more shot this morning, and you can leave. Eat some porridge. I made it for you all morning." No. I screamed in terror. The nightmare named porridge haunted me even more than the sleep paralysis and the terrifying nights I had just experienced.